Today I'm going to be getting back out in the studio and just making a real simple little cylinder just to hold some glazing brushes. It's been a while since I've been out here. I don't know about you, but when I lose momentum on doing something, it's really hard to pick it back up. So I'm getting back out today and just gonna make something simple. You know, the project doesn't really matter. It's the act of getting back out there and trying to pick that momentum back up that really is what I'm trying to do today. So I'm using a clay I haven't used before. It's called the Buffalo Wallow. I believe it's a mid-fire. I have like a dozen different clays out here that I've just accumulated between studio moves that I no longer remember what they are, and they're all in various states of not very workable. Like, some just need to be dried out and reclaimed, and some could probably be rehydrated with some effort, but this one was ready to go. So to reduce friction, get that momentum going, here I am trying out a new clay. And you can see I'm just throwing this slab, just using a method where you just kind of toss it and turn it over to get it thinner, and then I can roll it with the rolling pin without having to do as much work, and it's more even this way. So I'm just smoothing out the surface here, getting rid of the texture that's left by the work surface. And then I'm gonna draw a circle, and really, I didn't have a particular size I was aiming for, so my default is like, you know, generally the size of the palm of my hand. This seemed like a good size. And I'm just making a container for some glaze brushes, so just something that's not too narrow, but doesn't need to be super wide either, is all that I'm aiming for. So I'm just going to use the sponge here to smooth out those edges. It's nice to kind of do these little touches as you're going so that you don't have to do them all at the end. Are they always necessary? Maybe not, but keeps it looking nice as I go along. So I'm starting to wedge this clay from the cutoff of the foot, and as I'm doing it, I'm realizing this isn't enough clay to make the entire wall for my cylinder. So you'll see here, and I'm just gonna swap this out for a larger piece that will be big enough to actually roll out the entire side. And here I'm just using that method again of flipping and throwing the clay down to flatten it out. It makes it easier to roll. Now at this moment I'm thinking, this is getting too wide. I need it to be narrower and longer. So I just kind of tap the sides there, and I'm just using my glaze brush here to see, okay, is this gonna be tall enough? And then I'm starting to use the rolling pin to really lengthen it. You know, when you're making slabs, you have to think about the shape of the slab that you're going to cut out. It's always a bit of mental gymnastics here to remember how the slabs are going to come together. Remembering that how wide the slab is how tall the pot will be, and how long the slab is how much circumference, how long you're going to need the clay to wrap around the foot. So here I'm just checking the thickness of my slab and making sure that it's looking even and about how thick I want the clay to be when I cut it out. Okay, so now I'm gonna do this trick that I really like, where you put a little mark on the foot, and then I'm gonna put it on my slab, and I'm putting a mark on the slab there with the needle tool. Okay, and this is about where I think the slab is wide enough for it to be the entire height of the pot that I want, and I'm checking it with my paintbrush. Yep, moving it up. Okay, so now I'm going to take that little mark on my foot and line it up with the mark on the slab, and then I'm just going to roll that slab all the way across here, and when my mark touches the clay again, I'll put a mark there. And that is how long of a slab I need to wrap around this foot. I don't know if that's like obvious to everybody, but I like it. I've always enjoyed using this trick, especially teaching it to my students. It's always fun because it's like cheater's math. You don't have to calculate anything, you just use real physical objects to figure it out. And I'm not using this ruler to measure anything, I'm just using it as a straight edge, but then I'll use it to check and make sure that the length between the two lines is parallel to make sure it's the same distance. So I'll just make sure here in a minute that the length between the left side and the length on the right side is the same. And that's how I'll make sure that it's squarish. The nice thing about clay is it's really forgiving. You know, if it's not perfectly square, I'll just stretch it into place. You don't have to be a perfectionist with this. So here I'm going to use a trick to make a flush connection between the two sides. So I'm cutting a 45-degree angle with my needle tool, creating a bevel on this side, and then I'm going to flip the clay over and do that same cut on the other side, but they'll be reversed. So because of the way I flip the clay over, this is on the back in a sense. It'll make sense when you see it coming together. So I'm just gonna go ahead and score this bevel before I start picking up the clay. I usually like to score and I use water. Some people swear by slips, some people say you don't need either. I'm curious to know, what do you think? Do you think scoring's always necessary? Oh, here are my texture rollers. I haven't gotten to use these yet, and I'm gonna test them out. Since this is just kind of a pot to get myself back in the studio, might as well use it to test some things. At least that's what I was thinking, and then I realized that I want to like the pot when I'm done, even if it's just a test or just a little get back kind of thing. So here I made a quick slab to do some texture rolling tests on. And I thought about skipping smoothing out the surface, but then I realized that wouldn't give me a full idea of what the textures look like when the clay has been smoothed, and I'm gonna smooth it on my final work, so I might as well smooth this test. And here we go. So this one looks kind of like a scale kind of texture. I don't know what this shape is called, but it's been real popular in rugs. I like it a lot. And then we've got kind of a honeycomb. Okay, and now I'm gonna flip it over on the back and roll it a little bit more so that I can test my last rollers. I'm rolling it because the other side is textured, and so it's gonna have uneven give, or at least that's my theory, and so I just wanted to flatten that out a bit. This one I'm real excited about. It's some cone flowers, and they look really good. I really like them. This one has some trees on it, kind of like a winter forest, more branches than leaves. I like that one a lot. This one is just some like abstract waves. And then that last one is also kind of an abstract texture, just some lines with dots. It's really pretty. But I'm gonna use those cone flowers on my pot for today. We'll find some other use for these other textures. So I'm preparing the slab right now while it's flat, smoothing, rounding over corners, because it's a lot easier to do that while it's flat than once it's formed into a cylinder. After it's a cylinder, if you're trying to smooth out or change the shape of the lip, it's really easy to deform the shape and take it out of round, so it's better to do that shaping while it's flat. I don't always remember to do it, but when I do, I'm glad. And here I'm thinking, why did I smooth the other side? It's gonna pick up that texture again, but that's okay, I'm just doing my best. It's never perfect. Okay, and now to roll the texture. I considered using this little texture at the top and combining two, but I didn't feel like they really went together, so I decided to just do the one texture with the cone flowers, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. When you're using a texture roller like this, it's really important to keep the pressure even and consistent as you're rolling. So I'm trying to make sure that I push the texture roller the same amount as I continue to roll it across the entire slab. This does deform the slab a little bit, so sometimes I think it might be better to roll the texture on before you cut out your rectangle or whatever shape your slab's gonna be. But sometimes I think it doesn't really matter, I'll just trim it. And it's a little bit easier to know where to roll it when my slab's already cut out. So now I'm gonna test fit the slab here onto the foot, and it's a pretty good fit, that's great. It's a little bit bigger than the foot, and that's good so long as I can still stack it on top. Technically, you could put the foot inside the walls, or you can put the walls on top of the foot. I prefer putting the walls on top of the foot. One thing that I see when my students have wrapped the walls around the foot is that sometimes they end up with a gap between the side of the foot and their wall, and they have to fill that in, and that just becomes more work. So I think it makes the construction easier, and usually, for me at least, it keeps that bottom angle square, so like my sides and my bottom meet at the angle that I mean for them to, instead of kind of like sagging out. And it also prevents getting gaps between the foot and the wall. So I've already started to blend those two bevels together to make the wall, and here I'm getting the foot ready to attach. And this happens to me when I haven't done a particular thing in a while. I forget the steps that make stuff easier, and I'm going to attach this foot before I finish blending those bevels together, and I'm gonna wish that I had done that first. It's not impossible to blend those bevels together and really make the inside look pretty after I put the foot on, but it's easier to do it before putting the foot on. So if you're making a cylinder, try blending the walls together all the way before you put the foot on. It's faster and easier. And this is especially true when your pot is small and it's difficult to get your hands inside of it, or if your pot is really tall. Anyway, so here I go, putting the walls on the foot. So here I'm starting to blend the walls to the foot, and you can see the walls stick out a little bit past the foot, so I'm just pinching that clay and smoothing it or pulling it down onto the foot a little bit. I'm gonna make a seamless connection. There's some potters who make the seam like part of the design. That's not really my thing, but I do think it's pretty when it's done really well. But I usually blend my seams and make the pot feel seamless. So this is gonna take a little bit of time, so I'm pulling that corner of the wall down onto the foot, and then I'm also pushing the corner of the foot up onto the wall, kind of pushing that clay back and forth to really blend it together. And doing that is gonna fill in that gap, that difference in width between the wall and the foot, and it's also going to get rid of that seam. Having the clay cross back and forth over that line is going to make it to where you don't notice the seam later. So here I'm rolling out a tiny coil. See? Skinny as possible, skinnier than my pinky. And I'm going to use this to really bond the inside of the wall with the foot. I'm going to dip it in water and then I'll put it down in there. And it's really hard to see, but what that's going to do is fill in any gaps that might be between the wall and the foot on the inside. This may not be a completely necessary step, and actually if I used a thick slip, that would do the same job and probably be easier. But this is the method that I've usually taught my students, especially because they didn't always have slip. So here I am doing it, wishing that this pot was either shorter or wider and easier to get my hand into, but I'm not going to leave in a lot of this footage because it's kind of boring. But the inside, that coil, you can see it there, will get completely blended into where you don't even see that a coil used to be there. It'll feel like just the wall smoothly bends into the foot. So here I'm trying to show you how the inside is starting to blend together. So you can see I've kind of smashed it into that corner. And one thing you have to worry about or think about when you're making pottery is if you're putting pressure on the inside of the pot outward, it's gonna change the outside. So I'm taking a break from working on that inner coil and blending together my outer edge, the outer connection between the foot and the wall. And that's gonna let me correct any push out that I might have created by putting the coil inside. And then you can see here I'm putting my hand inside and just gently pressing with my fingers to counterbalance the pressure that I'm putting on the outside. That way my pot stays the shape that I mean for it to be and doesn't get smushed out of control. And here I've also decided to create sort of a bevel that's going to make the pot feel lifted, like cast a nice shadow when I put it down on the table. So I'm starting to really get rid of any sort of seam, and also while I'm doing that, changing that edge from being a 90-degree angle to creating sort of a 45-degree angle where the corner would be. Now that the foot is looking good, I'm going to go back and work on that connection where the two ends of the wall meet. Now, one thing I hate about rolling a texture on a cylinder and then connecting it this way is that you lose some of that texture. There's some different solutions for this, like I could incorporate stamped textures and stamp over that area. I could also do a type of connection that doesn't become seamless, doesn't use the bevel technique, but instead allows that seam to become part of the design and kind of leave a raw edge where they connect. But that's just not what I did this time. And so I'm just gonna completely smooth it, and there will just be a spot where there's not texture, and that's just part of it, part of the character of the clay and of hand building. Now I'm using a tool to help me blend the inside. I really want to make it seamless on the inside, even though, you know, not everybody's gonna look there. Maybe some of it will get covered up by glaze. It's really important to me for my craft to look good inside and out, top to bottom. So here's what this seam looks like when it's completely finished. I toyed around with rolling the texture roller over it and trying to reintroduce the texture, but it ended up making a double effect, so I used a rib and smoothed it back out. Now I'm using that tool to keep working on that inside joint where I put that coil into the bottom, and I'm gonna get that completely smooth. See? It took a lot longer than I was on screen. But there you can see, completely smooth transition from wall to foot, no gaps, no corners. So now I'm just making final corrections, smoothing out, making the final textures of this pot, wishing that I had rounded this lip over more while the slab was still flat. But that's okay, it's just a brush holder. It's not like anyone's gonna be drinking out of it, so it doesn't need to be rounded over for that. Smoothing out and making final touches to your pot like this are really important for the overall aesthetic and first impressions that it's gonna make on other people when they look at your work. It's funny because the construction, the assembly, is the exciting part, but I feel like you spend at least half your time, if not more, prepping, rolling out a slab or something, and then finishing, smoothing, and making the final texture. But look at it, it looks great. One other step that I'm gonna do here is I'm going to slightly press in the foot. You can see I'm doing that with my thumbs, just gently pressing the foot upward to create sort of a concave surface on the foot and make a foot ring almost. So now when you set this pot down, it's not going to sit on the entire surface, it's just going to sit on those outer edges. So I'm trying to show you here with the tool, that little concave shape. Let's see if we can see it better with the ruler. Now the reason I'm doing this is to prevent the pot from rocking. By pressing that clay up in the middle, we're going to help the pot not warp while it's firing, and it creates a smaller surface area for the pot to sit on, and that's just going to make it more steady, less likely to rock after it's fired. And now for the final step, I'm going to sign my work, and I'm also going to label this pot Buffalo Wallow for the clay body, because this pot is serving multiple purposes. Not only is it going to hold my glaze brushes, it's also going to serve as a test tile so that I can see what Buffalo Wallow looks like after it's fired, and I tested a new texture roller on it, so I'm going to see how that goes. Here I'm just wiping off those little crumbs that build up when you write on clay. It would be better if I waited for this to be leather hard, because they would brush off a lot easier and they wouldn't indent the clay, but I was impatient and I just went ahead and brushed them off. But look at it, it looks great. I'm excited to see how this clay turns out and how that texture looks after it's fired. So thank you for joining me out in the studio today. I hope you'll join me when the next video comes out. I already have it in the works. I'm making more of a sculpture in that one, but you'll have to tune in to see what I'm making. See you next time!